Anger can be mobilizing. It can be a potent source of power. But in the last 5 years, as I've discovered in Oxford, it's also very threatening to privilege. It's threatening to an established way of doing things. And I think this became quite an animating force in the Rhodes Must Fall movement and in the debate around decolonization. That anger became a way of forcing a series of uncomfortable conversations about racial inequality, about structural forms of exclusion, about the marginalization of different forms of identity. And at the same time, though, it's a difficult force to contain or to hold. And so the anger that's performed in public and that's used to shine a light on a set of political concerns can at times turn inward. And I also saw this happening among student activists in Oxford. So it became this kind of potent but mercurial force, this potent but mercurial emotion that can serve a series of quite powerful political claims, and yet at the same time can be destructive unintentionally. And so this is kind of a way of sketching out a series of views about anger. What I'd really be curious to know, Albie, from your perspective, as somebody whose life and whose career has provided many occasions to be seized by anger, what does that come to mean in a more intimate sense? What has it meant to your thinking about the world, your thinking about society, your thinking about the things that you want to change?
It's funny, you know, I'm going to stream along with my consciousness because the first thing that pops into my head is I felt there was something wrong with me, that I didn't feel more angry. It was Anthony Lewis, then an op-ed writer for the New York Times, 1990, Mandela's being released. He comes to see me. He's married to Margie Marshall, a great judge in the United States, a friend of mine. And he says, well, Albie, now you're going back. And he looks at my arm that was blown off by a bomb. You must be feeling terribly angry. What are you going to do? And I said, you know, Tony, I think there's something wrong with me. Even when I was in prison, I felt I ought to feel a rage against the guards. They deliver my food on a tin plate as they're walking away. I want to have a knife and plunge it in their back. And I didn't feel that. And I said, I don't feel angry. We're coming back to South Africa now, and I feel elated. I feel joyous. And maybe it's a fault on my part. It's a deficiency. You're a revolutionary, and you don't even feel angry. What's the matter with you? And he said, lighten up, Albie. I'm not going to try the American accent. He said, I've just spoken to Nelson Mandela and to Walter Sisulu and Ahmed Kathrada, and they're all saying the same thing. So it's not a personal deficiency on my part. It's a sense of joy and elation, because it's the triumph of the things we are fighting for. And that sense of joy and triumph and transcendence, if you like, was so powerful. That smile of Mandela, I even mentioned that when I come back to Cape Town and I'm speaking to young people and I'm saying, you know, now we're getting the chance. Now we can move forward. Now we can get into government. And I said, Mandela's smile is worth 100 AKs. And one guy puts up his hand. He said, I'd rather have one AK. And everybody burst out laughing. But in a sense, that's the kind of tensions we were dealing with.
Yeah.
But for me, I think what's happening is it's using the energy of anger to turn negativity into positivity. If the anger is just rage, it can destroy you because you are so filled just with rage. If the anger is canalized and turned around, it's the swords into plowshares theme, which strangely enough, I discovered. I'm in prison, I'm in solitary confinement. The only book I've got is the Bible. I'm reading through the Bible, and it's full of everybody smiting everybody down to the last chicken and dog. And then these beautiful passages, the Song of Songs, Solomon, and finally Isaiah, and turning swords into plowshares. And that's so beautiful and so powerful, so transcendent and so strong. And when it came to our anger in South Africa, I'm using it in a very collective sense of our generation. We've been in the struggle for decades. That was the deep and the profound theme. And for me personally, when it came to things like meeting the person who put the bomb in my car, he phoned me, I'm a judge now, and he said he's going to the Truth Commission, and am I willing to see him before he goes to the Truth Commission too? He was high up in the hit squad. He didn't call it hit squad, but high up in the army. And he'd arranged for the bomb in my car. And he's now going to the Truth Commission to get indemnity for what he's done through telling the truth. And I remember telling him he's at the security door, to open the door. I open the gate and I see this man looking at me, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and so this is the guy who tried to kill me. And in his eyes, this is the man I tried to kill. We hadn't met, we didn't know each other. We hadn't fought over love, money, position, or anything. But he was on that side, I was on this side. And I still always tell this story. As we walk to my chambers, he's striding like a soldier, and I'm trying to slow him down with my judge's ambulation. And we sit down, we talk, and he tells me about how good he was at university and how he rose up in the army. Imagine, he's telling me how he rose up in the army, how clever he became at it as an assassin. And eventually he tells me about the bomb in my car. And I say at the end of the conversation, Henry, I've got to get on with my work. I stand up. I said, normally when I say goodbye to someone, I shake that person's hand. I can't shake your hand. Go to the Truth Commission. Tell them what you know. Maybe we'll meet one day. And as we walk back, I see he's not like a soldier anymore. He's slouching along like a defeated person. I forget about him. A few months pass. It's a hot November day in South Africa, December. And I go to a party, and the music is loud. And I hear a voice that says to me, Albie. And I look around. I can't believe it. It's Henry. And he's beaming. And he said, I went to the Truth Commission. I spoke to Bobby and Sue and Farouk. I told them everything I knew. And you said to me, maybe one day we'll meet. And he put out his hand. I put out my hand. I shook his hand. I almost fainted. He went away beaming. But I heard afterwards he'd actually left the party suddenly, went home, and he cried for 2 weeks. I don't know if it's true. I'm not even following up. I want to believe it's true. Because for me, it's more important that this assassin was crying than that he goes to jail. And I want to think to myself, what's going on in my head, you know? What's happening here? And for me, the power of, I call it soft vengeance. I'm recovering in hospital after the bomb, and I get a note that says, don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. And I think avenge me, cut off the arm, blind in one eye. Is that the country we want? If we get democracy, if we get freedom, roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. That will be my soft vengeance. And that theme of soft vengeance became the theme of my life. Going back, helping to write the Constitution, voting as an equal for the first time, soft vengeance, soft vengeance. Getting onto the Constitutional Court, upholding the dignity of people, putting up this beautiful building on the site of a prison. We chose the site of a prison as the place to build our Constitutional Court. Plows in, swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. And when it came to the theme of the roads must fall, that's at the University of Cape Town. The beginning of the fall movement throughout the world. We're so proud that we had one of the greatest villains who had to fall in Cape Town, and that triggered Oxford and Yale and everywhere else. And as a student, I used to rush past that statue, and I hated roads. My dad was a trade union leader. They hated the Chamber of Mines. Roads symbolized oppression, dispossession, the pass laws, white supremacy, domination, using machine guns on people with spears, and everything we detested. But we had bigger fish to fry then, get rid of the apartheid system. Now suddenly that statue that I've loathed is being challenged by a new generation of students. And I'm thinking, don't pull it down, don't melt it, confront it. have a competition involving people now, artists and others, with a jury drawn from different sectors of the community to confront that artwork that is so kind of banal and traditional, of this powerful bronze statue of a powerful man. Everybody's kind of forgotten about him. They just remember the name through the scholarships now. But confront him with another artwork, a contemporary artwork. And somebody coined the term juxtaposition, and I love it. So he's speaking about what I'm proposing, juxtaposition, not demolition, juxtaposition. And juxtaposition is then to have a greater artwork, confronting that particular artwork. But by then the emotions and passions were so great, they had to take it away. They had to take it away. Yeah. But I think of where we built our court, right in the heart of the Old Fort prison, where Mandela was locked up, Gandhi was locked up. It's another boast we have in South Africa. We have the only jail in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. And that's where we put our constitutional court. It's that juxtaposition, the negativity into positivity, the transformation that can be brought about in that way. Because we are the same people. We're the same humanity who did terrible things. We're not going to become better by discarding half of our humanity, but by enabling the transformation, the opening up, the challenge. So that's my kind of thrust for the conversation. Over to you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Albie. That's really beautiful and incredibly inspiring. And I love the elegance of both, you know, what you've written about in Soft Vengeance, but also what you're suggesting now about the power of juxtaposition. At the same time, I wonder if I might nettle a couple of things that you've said and maybe push back on one or two points. I think that one of the questions that we really need to ask about anger is, you know, why people are angry. Because if you're at the receiving end of a system of oppression, whether that's on the receiving end of white supremacy, misogyny, ableism, transphobia, classism, or any of the myriad ways that we as human beings find to oppress each other. Sometimes the appropriate emotional response is one of anger at being maligned and marginalized, anger of being deprived of certain opportunities, and anger of being denied belonging. And sometimes that can even be in the most intimate of spheres, familial or social. And I sometimes think that when we're trying to understand that anger, I worry that we place a burden on the recipients of oppression to also be magnanimous, that we place a burden on the oppressed to not only cope with that oppression, but to transcend it, to be able to hold, you know, those with whom they're in opposition in a kind of generous and giving regard. And yet at the same time, it seems to me that this can also be used to compound the condition of being oppressed. So one of the things that emerges, that bubbles under the surface within Rhodes Must Fall, certainly in South Africa and to an extent in Oxford, is this sense of, you know, enough's enough, that the systems that we are a part of are really resistant to change, that this isn't being done in good faith. And why must it always fall on us to be the better people? You know, and we've seen a revival of this with the anti-racism protest that's followed in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, where, you know, many Black people are just feeling the raw pain of hurt, the raw pain of a system that time and again proves so recalcitrant to change. And so I wonder then, you know, our perspectives on this are quite different in a biographical sense. You know, I might be looking forward, you might be looking back. And I think that sometimes what that means, I think for many young people, is we don't know how the story unfolds. We don't know if being magnanimous is ever rewarded. What we know is the acute pain and the anger that follows in the here and now. And so I guess maybe that becomes my question to you. How do you talk to and engage, particularly with young people, particularly with young Black people, whether in the US and South Africa, elsewhere, who are on the receiving end of structural racism? You know, how do, you know, without, you know, compounding that burden of turning the other cheek?
Now, I had a very interesting and a little bit painful experience for me just last week, where I was excited and extolling the Black Lives Matter movement and the impact it's having, with millions of people going into the streets. And the audience was my wife, who in South Africa would have been classified as a colored person. It's relevant to the story. And somebody from elsewhere in Africa, very distinguished intellectual. And there was a response from the intellectual I was speaking to, and she said she felt uneasy about the pouring of people out into the streets in such a big way. And I said, but it's terrific. It's a validation of all these years of struggle. And then she said, we don't need to be validated because whites are going out into the street and joining us. And my response to her was, I suppose if I was born Black, my answer would be different. Partly the validation is of a freedom fighter. It's fantastic when you've been like under a stone for years, a loser, treated as a non-entity, a troublemaker, a maverick, a crazed person. And suddenly, wow, you know, what you've been saying is now accepted, it's becoming mainstream. That's wonderful. That's really what I meant by validated.
Yeah.
But it came through as if, because now whites are saying Black Lives Matter, Black lives start to matter because whites are saying that.
Yeah.
And I said to her, you know, that maybe if I was born Black, my response would be different. But part of my magnanimity theme is it's not a duty. I mean, Black South Africans are saying it again and again and again. You know, we've shown such magnanimity, and it's been astonishing and extraordinary in all sorts of ways, in a massive way, through the Constitution, through all sorts of forms of conduct. And still, so many whites automatically think they're superior, they're disdainful, they're unthinking, they don't speak African languages, they're not responsive to African sentiments and feeling and so on. Where's it getting us? But for me, the magnanimity, I just see it as the power of the Oliver Tambo. His spirit was always, we are greater. Not just we are nicer, we are greater in our civilization, our Africanity, through the generosity that we have. The whites are too narrow, too self-contained, too self-referential, wrapped up in all their quirks and complexes and so on. They can never really imagine a country where we live together as equals. We Africans who suffered so much for being who we are, we will have the breadth of vision, Ubuntu we call it, the capacity to embrace everybody. And that was powerful. That wasn't being nice. It came from an enormous strength. And if somehow that strength can come through, the strength of transcendence, the energy of transforming the anger into something positive where you're taking the initiative, you're giving the lead, you're not being nice, you're not stroking anybody, you're not eager to please the oppressors or to show how civilized and magnanimous you are. You just feel free in yourself. You feel strong in yourself. And that's what the Mandelas have, and the Tutus have, and the Albertina Sisulu's have, and the Kathradas have, and all our great freedom fighters had that quality. And it was very powerful and very, very strong and very, very attractive. So, you know, that's the sort of theme I'm getting at. But in saying that and doing that, I acknowledge, I don't confess, I don't admit, I acknowledge as a biological, existential fact that I am a volunteer to anger. I'm a volunteer to struggle. I'm a volunteer in the freedom struggle. It's not in my bones in that sense. It's in my mother's milk. So it came, if you like, through suckling, because my mom was politically active, my dad was active, but it's different from growing up with that feeling. Because of who you are, automatically, all those eyes are looking at you and all those demands are being placed upon you. And I have to acknowledge that.
So there's something just in this last part of what you're saying that I think strikes a really interesting chord for me. I remember a few years back, I was invited to speak at a college at Oxford called All Souls. Now, All Souls is the most kind of elite and exclusive college at Oxford. It also has a library there called the Codrington Library. Now, Codrington, who it's named after, had huge slave plantations in the Caribbean. And a large part of his estate from slave labor went to build up a second estate in Gloucestershire in the UK, and then has fed into institutions like All Souls. So, you know, All Souls is a real beneficiary of a very, you know, distinct lineage of slavery that we can identify, you know, down to individuals. But it's also representative of a system that exists more widely in many parts of the UK, where so much of, or so many, I should say, public artifacts, libraries, road names, institutions, and so on, are melded into, have baked into them this kind of noxious history of imperialism and of slavery. But one of the things that strikes me when I had these conversations and when I spoke at All Souls, and I tried to make this case, I said, you know, to my audience of, let's say, elderly, powerful white people, there seemed to me a bit of a lack of empathy and unwillingness to think what it might be like to embody the experience of being Black or being marginal in one way or another within this society. You know, in the way that you've just described, I'm moved by your words because, you know, you're coming at this conversation with this cognizance that, you know, the existential condition of being oppressed into, you know, is sort of different to being a volunteer, which is, you know, a lovely way of putting it. But that kind of empathy, if I could call it a radical empathy, is not something that I've seen a lot of when these conversations emerge in the UK. And so then what we get is the anger when imperial history is excavated and brought into the public arena, is it's diminished and treated as petulance. So at Rhodes Must Fall in Oxford, for instance, it's, you know, who are these kind of infantile, entitled students who can come to our great institution and start demanding change? And a real lack of willingness to look at the mirror that's being held up and saying that, okay, yes, there might be a great deal we see as glorious within Britain's past, but there's also an awful lot that's quite tragic. And there's like an unwillingness to have that reckoning. And so I guess then that kind of ties into the next theme I want to ask you about or to explore your thoughts about, which is this word, this term decolonization. So, you know, that's become the currency with which we speak on university campuses as a way of trying to imagine social change. And it seems to me that we ask the word decolonization to do an awful lot of work. But maybe if I highlight sort of two domains here, there is part of it that is kind of structurally transformative, that changes how we do teaching, how we do hiring, how we do representation in the faculty and student body. And then there's the kind of symbolic dimensions. How do we choose to mark public space? Who are the figures to whom we accord pride of place in our portraiture, in our statues, and so on. So we have the sort of structural and the symbolic. And I'd be very curious to know from your perspective, what you think is the importance and the interplay in structural and symbolic forms of decolonization.
Well, I think the two go together almost seamlessly. And the one without the other, I think will end up being disruptive in the negative sense. Disruption can be very positive. Together you get positive disruption, separate So if it's just structural and if it doesn't touch on the human soul and the symbolism and the ambience and the meaning of relationships and life and the poetry of interaction, it's not going to get anywhere. But if it's all just soft and intangible, that's also not enough. You want jobs, you want people, you want access to power, you want access to resources. So I think these things interact all the time. But we had a very astonishing experience in this regard when it came to building our new constitutional court. And it was fantastic. We had nothing. We had the old parliament, which we had to decolonize.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's slightly different. It's the ANC in power, black people there before only whites. We had the union buildings up on the hills in Pretoria, designed at the height of imperial grandeur by British architects who'd been to India, and quite a beautiful building. Just a new occupant called Nelson Mandela. But we didn't have a constitutional court that had to enforce the values of the Constitution. So we could invent ourselves. And that was fantastic. Because normally if you take over an old building, an old court building, and you try and change it, if it's got any images, it'll be pictures of dead white male judges. Now one day I'm going to be a dead white male judge. So there's nothing wrong with that in itself. But if that's all that you see, it's saying only whites mattered, only men mattered. And our Constitution speaks about a non-racial, non-sexist society. So the simple things of the imagery that seem to be so banal and just relics of the past actually become balls and chains from the past, weighing us down in terms of who matter, what signifies in the past. So we decided to go for, first of all, choosing the site of the prison. Many people said, knock down the prison. That's a place of hatred, of oppression. And we said, no, we want to keep the prison. Our history is real. And we want people to go there and see it. But take that negative energy and convert it into positivity. Know why we have a constitution, why we have a court, why we have fundamental rights. Remember the pain, and there's so much pain we still have today. But when people go to the prison, they don't end up there. They go to the court to see you can take the negative and convert into positivity. And then we chose the design based on, we had an international competition. We simply said we want a building that's not ornate, it doesn't represent power, but represents restraints on power, and that had an African, South African feel and quality, not just a melange, a fruit salad of a bit of colonial, a bit of Cape Dutch, a bit of Zulu beehive, but something that's speaking to the new democracy that's emerging. And some young architects from Durban and a town planner from Johannesburg won with a building based on the theme of justice under a tree. They didn't build a big tree and have rooms in it. It was just the thematic of the openness, the visibility, the inside, outside, seeing from outside in, inside out, and the warmth of it, using modern building techniques to create a very friendly kind of a building. Now, we didn't use the word decolonized, but it's a perfect example of a decolonized or non-colonized or an anti-colonial type building. It's warm, it's friendly, the artwork is drawn from all the different sectors of the community, the minds, the hands, the imprints of different people. And that's creating an ambience that we like to feel coincides with, reinforces, feeds into and feeds from our Bill of Rights, our fundamental rights, and the style of work that we have. So we were in a position of creating our iconography, if we like, not putting down something, but in a context where we were juxtaposing our beautiful, open, friendly African field building to the prisons of the past. I think that gives something of an answer to what you're doing. We don't want to pull down the buildings of Oxford. The antiquity is part of the fun. There's new stuff going up all the time that makes the old even more fun and pleasure, because it's not dominating, but it's still part of the stream of what's happening there. I don't know what's happened to the actual road statue, but you've confronted now with an opportunity, I would think a great one would be to juxtapose that statue with something new, a new artwork. The way I put it, in Cape Town, we would have the last laugh on Rhodes, because he would now be surrounded by art created by black artists, white art, brown artists in different forms, maybe using, who knows, all the different technology that's available now, but it will be a current emotion and feel. Black Lives Matter, and once Black Lives Matter, then all lives can matter. All lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. Some are introducing that theme into the new kind of artwork.
No, I love that. And I think one of the things that happened when Rhodes Must Fall started in Oxford around 2015 was, it got caricatured. So we had, students running around saying that Rhodes Must Fall was no different to ISIS, that these were, rabid iconoclasts intent on destroying things, which of course is, a gross misrepresentation of what was going on. And it seemed to me, as the conversations unfolded over time, was that this narrative of tearing down had become so prevalent. And it betrayed a kind of critical lack of imagination, an inability, a kind of myopia, an unwillingness to imagine that actually, Oxford, yes, has this rich, antiquated tradition, but it's also a site of innovation. It's also subject to social change. It's a place in which different kinds of people and different sorts of history can meet. So why not reflect that more vividly and more creatively in the spaces that we inhabit, so that we're not only, say, reappropriating statues, reworking exhibitions in museums, but we're really touching the human soul. We're saying that, this space initially intended as this monastic institution for white men has become a cultural center of learning. So let's reflect that. And I think that in a sense, dovetails with this question of atonement. It's something that can be more progressively realized. But I wanted to shift maybe to another theme that I think is lurking in the background of our conversation, which I think is really central, both to anger and to healing. And it's a question of intergenerational divides. And I think in our politics, globally and say in the context of the UK, in the context of South Africa, we're seeing this playing itself out in many different ways. So the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa invited this question of intergenerational divide between the kind of born-free generation as well as those who fought against apartheid, and the question of the met as well as the unfulfilled promises from one generation to the next. In the UK, we see it in quite a radical way, sort of in electoral politics, where young people and old people have such radically different views about things like Brexit, things like climate change and so on, really different visions for what society is. And we're seeing the same thing happening in the US as well, just as another point of contrast. And so I guess my question, which is, I'm going to just frame in a very broad way, is how do you read and how do you make sense of the intergenerational divides that you've been exposed to?
It's been fantastic for me. It's given me a whole new lease of life, being intergenerational. And I'm super duper intergenerational. The whole generation in between me and the young people. I get so excited when I engage with them. And I tell them, it sounds like the height of narcissism. I just see young Albie Sachses with that same intensity and seriousness and gravity and fun and irreverence that I had. So for me, it's not a challenge. And I get so angry with so many of my contemporaries who, say, Albie, you speak to the young people. You'll show them. I don't want to speak to them, show them what's what. I want to tell them a bit about who we were, how motivated we were. We were fiery. Mandela wasn't a sellout. He was a brave, marvelous, all-round human being. And you are erasing this great black man from history by saying he was a sellout. You're wiping him out and destroying everything. But I want to tell stories, real stories. active stories, and I want to listen. And I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by the use of language, you know, we were very heavy with ideas to the point of fault. Theory. Suddenly everything just became dissolved. It's a mixture of loss of certainty, postmodernism in ideas generally, maybe everybody having access to information and media and all the rest. And somehow ideas seem to go out of the window completely. And now through the Flawless movement, ideas have come back. And I find that very rich, and I think that's very significant. It's not how can I get ahead. It's not simply challenging white supremacy because it's blocking my career paths. It's blocking my existence as a human being. And the gender issues come in, the transgender theme has been very strong, intersectionality, a lot of themes like that have been coming through. So I, as somebody from an older generation, happen to be thrilled by what's happening. And I'm glad it's the way it's around. It would be awful if the fresh ideas belong to the old people and the supremely conservative ideas belong to the young people. So I derive hope from those energies. And I hope that they remain starry-eyed and full of vitality. And when people say to me, Albie, what advice would you give to the young people of today? I've got a very glib answer. The only advice I'd give to the young people of today is don't listen to the advice of old people like me. Go ahead and be as irreverent and challenging and sparky as we were. But people are not satisfied with that, so I'll have to work on it a little bit and come up with some themes in terms of the importance maybe of working in teams, working with other people, of listening, of opening up, of being generous, and of having fun. I have to often berate people in the human rights movement for their long faces. You know, when I still remember the day when Mandela was released in South Africa, and we were jubilant in the ANC, unbanning the ANC, and our anti-apartheid friends had long faces. How could they keep him locked up for so long? Not with a British accent, not a South African accent. And we were jubilant. So be jubilant at the times of the breakthroughs. Celebrate when you have a chance to celebrate. And don't go into the human rights activities with long faces, with heaviness. The people who are oppressed don't want that. They're repressed already. They want vitality, they want energy. They don't want you to be so burnt out, so leaden, so heavy, so dominated by your sorrow and misery in relation to the world that you're not giving them a lift. So this is the kind of bromide, if you like, that I offer.
No, I love that. And I'm going to hold those two things together, irreverence and vitality. I find that quite inspiring. I'm aware that there's been a bit of activity in the chat and that we've been navigating our way through quite a number of issues, and I'm sure there might be scope to perhaps open this up more widely. I'm looking at Tamsin for a cue here. Shall we open it up for discussion with those in attendance?
I'm going to hand that to Tom, who's going to facilitate that, I think, Simukai.
Okay, brilliant.
Sure, that's fine. There are some comments in the, Christelle had a comment, Hope had a comment, Louise. So if you wouldn't mind raising your hand or unmuting and directing your comments or asking your questions to Simukai or Albie.
Hi, just from my side, I was just commenting. I think it was just so wonderful listening to all of this, and I'm just kind of, as my stream of consciousness is going, I am writing down comments on what I think is relevant, and I'm reading the same from others. So nothing specific to add at this point, but just to say really enjoying the conversation.
Thanks, Christelle. Maybe Tom, I can just raise the one issue that came up for Albie to speak to, which is the point that South Africa was quite a unique success story that hasn't been replicated or doesn't seem to be being replicated in other areas. And how can that be enabled?
Okay, do we do one by one or should we take a bunch of questions?
Let's do one by one. Why don't we take that last one?
I think we can ask, South Africa is unique in a way. We have lots of problems now. There are lots of disappointments, but we've got a fabulous constitution and we have elections every 5 years. People used to say one man, one vote once. Very open society, people speak their minds. So we've got wonderful achievements here, but still very, very heavy problems. But I see similar themes in many other countries, many parts of the world. So I don't think, maybe we were unique in the rapidity of the transformation at that stage, at least at the political level, and unique maybe in the style with which it was done, and the elan, and the extraordinary way in which the Truth Commission functioned. It didn't solve the problems of pain, but at least it gave an important projection of how much people had suffered, and in a very, very vivid way. So I think there are very positive lessons to be picked up from from South African experience, and also the negative areas where we haven't succeeded as well we can, that can be passed on to other countries.
Simukai, do you want to comment?
No, I think Albie's taken that well, and not being South African myself, I will steer clear of commenting too heavily on that particular context, and happy to take other questions and comments.
Okay. Anyone else? Jordy, you had a comment as well as Hope.
Well, I like the question that Hope raised about when does anger become a resource, and it links to the point or the question that I had, because I can understand the issue around the destructiveness of anger if it's, consuming and that. But from my perspective, as a white South African, I think white South Africans have been let off the hook completely. And I think the idea of this kind of transcendence, and I mean, I wouldn't call, the liberation movement sellouts or anything like that, but kind of allowing all things to be, things to be all things to all people allows kind of a selective hearing, selective engagement, selective understanding of one's own culpability, responsibility, and I really do believe that there was always like such a finger point of whites who were involved in the struggle under apartheid, and that same small fingertip of whites who recognize really deeply the way in which privilege continues to inform their children's lives is very small, and most of them just refuse to do that. So my feeling is that, how, if anger is not the lever, then what is?
Okay, that's for me. Anger is the lever. It's what you do with the anger. And it's not, the anger's there. I mean, it's in people. It's not for me to say, be angry or don't be angry. People are angry. And I just see anger as a kind of an energy that can be very transformative. And sometimes for purposes of disruption, it needs to be rough. I'm not rough, I'm polite. That was one of my questions early on. We are nice guys. We speak eloquently, we use language well, we try not to be hurtful when it's not necessary. I can't help it. That's just the way I am. And I've got to be, in that sense, respectful of the anger of people who say fuck all the time, because that's the way it comes out. and they're angry and they pull down statues. And I'm not going to jump in and interpose myself and say, oh, please don't do that. Can't you do it nicely? Don't do it. I just do it in my way. I'm not going to pretend to shake a fist when I don't feel like that. You know, when we supported the Truth and Reconciliation campaign, I was very struck that so many people who projected themselves as liberal, whites, very much, they were totally against the Truth Commission. Thou shalt go to jail. Thou shalt be punished. And those of us, I was blown up, I lost an arm, my dad had 27 years in jail. We wanted the country to move forward. Sending someone to jail is not going to bring back my arm or erase, but the victory, the triumph of our ideals, what we wanted, that would be very, very powerful. So we saw the Truth Commission as something that would open up, allow the anger of people, the trauma of people, the pain of people to come out, to be acknowledged and recognized. And those responsible had to at least come and acknowledge and tell the truth. That was more important than locking them up in prison, which never does anything positive for anybody, but a very rough form of showing justice. Justice can't simply be equated with punishment and retribution. And I'm saying this as not as somebody based on any deep philosophical position on remorse, on repentance. It's not based on that at all. It's based on creating, enabling the kind of world we want to really emerge. I've seen big changes in the white community. I just wish they were more. I meet many, many white people who kind of are so confused, they don't know what to do. They do feel uncomfortable. They do feel concerned. They do feel guilty. Guilt, to my mind, is probably the least useful of all human emotions, because it can just trap you in guilt. But they do feel deeply concerned. They don't know what to do. And I think it's important that leadership be given in that respect. Whites are people. They're part of the nation. And one of the beautiful aspects of somebody like the leaders that we had, the Tambos and the others, was that the generosity came from inside. It was seen as something of the vision of the world we want to live in. It was seen, we use the term Ubuntu now in South Africa to convey that. But Ubuntu can be brought out by whites who are so eager to be loved, to be recognized, to be acknowledged, to be part of what's happening. And they don't quite know what to do. And I think it's really a useful thing for all of us. However, whatever kind of skin color we were born with, whatever our life experiences have been, to try and find ways to enable our nation to become a nation, not simply by pointing a finger and castigating, but that's got to be done. There had to be disruption, the complacency, the inwardness of the white community in general had to be shaken. And I think we're a much better off country for that. But now we need to take a step further and find ways to humanize people who refuse to find the full humanity in themselves as well as the full humanity in those around them.
Okay, thanks, Albie. We're going to turn to Luisa Zondo right now. She's had her patiently hand raised. Luisa, can we hear your question or comment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question is really around this theme that has been held right now, and this is about how we use anger to actually move towards healing our histories. And my observation is that there is very little focus in the host of institutions that we have in society on why we actually need to look at our anger, understand it, face it, and use it in a particular way. So my question starts with, for both Albie and Simo, what is the imperative for us to address this anger and to channel it in a particular way? And if we can have that common understanding, how do we start using that in social platform? I hear Albie says, you know, he's not going to get involved in directing people not to be angry. And I think that's the right approach. But the thing about it that is left unattended to for me is, how do we bring a societal focus on handling, holding this anger and using it as a powerful tool that it can be to actually catapult us to the place that we want to be. And that's the healed place where humanity sees the humanity in each one of us. So how do we bring it to the collective, to institutions, and beyond just the individual journey? We can all do our internal journey and heal and you know, sort of be zen, but how do we make it a communal focus which does have impact on the world? Thank you.
Simu, will you go?
Sure. I mean, I have no totalizing sort of solution to any of these questions because they're so deep and they touch on such profound aspects of history, but also our kind of present predicament and anxieties about the future. One thing that I see, and I've seen, say, for instance, in the work that I do at Oxford and parts of the UK, is I think institutions fail when they don't leave enough space just to acknowledge anger for what it is. Before we get into the question of how we channel it and address it, which are very, very important, I think there's often like the pressing of the fast forward button that doesn't want to sit with the uncomfortable reality of anger and just instead wishes to move forward to the place of, okay, how can we channel that? And I think that there is a lot to be gained in sitting with anger, in acknowledging the emotional depth that anger signifies, but also really trying to dwell on what is it that has created this anger in the first place. And so, you know, I see it a lot. I see a lot of young people really angry about the forms of economic insecurity that exist, as, you know, so many features of late capitalism have failed us. I see a lot of anger that's born out in a kind of planetary consciousness about the environment and looming ecological catastrophe. We are, of course, seeing a lot of anger over racial division, not only because of present injustices, but because of this long continuity of structural racism that feeds into it. And, you know, the list goes on and on. And I think that a lot of the institutions, certainly the ones I've been a part of, have not been skilled at dwelling on that anger, and therefore allowing a fuller expression of the humanity of those who have every reason to be angry. And so I think a shift in norms in this regard becomes one of the crucial first steps before we can then translate that into something that might be more programmatic. And so I think that that's probably the challenge that I would put forward is how do we start to create the forms of communal space for acknowledgement and recognition of anger.
Okay. Albie?
Well, I go along with that from my position as a volunteer, if you like. You know, I was just thinking, my life experience has when I watch a rugby match and South Africa playing, I want the black players to score the try, and I feel jubilant in all sorts of ways, just because of the ghastly banner in which apartheid extolled white supremacy, and the way people were forbidden to be full human beings because of that system and the way it's continued and so on. You know, I emotionally feel victory for me is, if you like, black beauty, black triumph, black advancement, black breakthrough, black initiative. It's been so empowering for me to be welcomed into a movement where I was given so much generosity, and at the same time, many times encountered hostility and anger. I'm totally with you in terms of there's got to be unconditional, unqualified acceptance of anger. When anger is based on justice, when it's based on response to oppression, inequity, it's got to be unqualified. It's got to be a point of departure. The follow-up question then is, I suppose there are two follow-up questions for people in the community that have been oppressed or still oppressed to work out how to handle the anger that they feel. And then a wider question for all of us, because those of us who are not part of that community, we can't just fold our hands and sit back and say we're not part of it. We don't want to be either perpetrators or victims or anything. We're just watching it. We're listening to debates. We're hearing this wonderful discussion between these two people at different ends of the world. Everybody should be active, involved, engaged in some way or another. And so what's going to happen? How can we find ways that bystanders become participants in these projects? And for me, the brilliant part of the Black Lives Matter was it took that terrible, bitter, awful sacrifice to get people now to identify, to say, we say in South Africa, to Mamina, take me, where do I come, where do I fit in? And I think that was a very important move forward for humanity. And I feel such joy when I see the athletes kneeling, and in the sports that were often so conservative, so forbidding, so harsh, so racist, allowing black performers to do well, but putting all those pressures on, I see it being acknowledged, and the kneeling and the kneeling and the kneeling. It's fine when the stars are kneeling. They're not just celebrities, they're kneeling and joining in. These are actions that are symbolical, they're real, they're meaningful, but now we have to find other ways of engaging and getting movement and drawing people in. And in that sense, we want to reach out. That's been the movement I belong to is always reaching out, not turning just into saying we are the select few of liberators and everybody else must follow us, but reaching out to our fellow human beings, finding ways of connecting and being creative in doing that. So the question you posed is the beginning of that project. And I hope you keep asking that question, keep pushing that question. I've never seen anybody look quite as thoughtful as you do, as I'm even speaking to you right now. And that's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Albie. We do have two questions. One is directly picking up on your last point, Albie. So we'll ask Ron Salo to ask the question, and then we'll go to Christelle September, who also has a comment from a previous point. So Ron, can we go to you and then Christelle? And then we'll hear from Simukai and Albie.
First of all, I'd like to say how wonderful this experience has been. Albie, your stories are inspirational and lovely and to the point. And I loved every single minute of what you said. And Simukai's, your expressions have been really powerful. They've touched me. And my question is this. Is it, and then this is a question, I don't know the answer. Is it easier to be magnanimous and turn to positivity and do all the things that Albie has so clearly enunciated and which we admire when you already have or you've gained power? Would you have had the same views if you didn't have Mandela coming out and being so absolutely inspirational with the Truth Commission and with how things have gone? If the power hadn't changed, would that have been possible? Would your views have been any different? And really to Simukai's point, are we expecting those people who are now suffering oppression to be burdened with with the joyfulness or the magnanimity that one really wants, which is positive, which is where we want to go? I recently was listening to television in this lockdown stage, more than I really want to John Oliver, who was talking about how history is written in the United States. And I learned all sorts of things about US history that has been really oppressed. Like, for example, that in the 1800s, after the Revolution War there were something like 8 or 9 black senators from the South in the Senate. But it's because of how white supremacy has been able to get in new rules, get in new ways to oppress the blacks there, that all of that valuable blood that was churned out during the revolution there when has been completely dismantled. Now, do we expect them to be magnanimous? And I question whether that is really possible. So it's a question. Would really like to hear Simu's and Albie's answers to that. Thank you.
Okay, Christel, would you mind answering and then making your question? Then we'll let Albie and Simukai respond to yours as well as Ron's.
Oh, are you talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I think I'm trying to thread together the comment that I had. And I think my comment was maybe in answer to Luisa's question. What does one, like, how do you create spaces for these things? There's internal work to be done, and then there's collective work to be done. And maybe threading back to the fact that why anger is a useful starting point and what do you do with this anger? Whenever I think about what needs to be done in the world, it's easier for me to start with me. And maybe that's just because that makes me feel like I've got personal power to move forward. So one of the things that I've realized in my journey is in working in corporate white patriarchal South Africa, that I can get very angry, and anger is actually it's a very omnipresent emotion. We're a very passionate family. So I've often found that anger does get things done, and kind of putting that anger out there in not an abrasive way, but certainly in a disruptive way, can get things done. But it got me to a ceiling. And it got me to a ceiling where I'm facing somebody who really, really disagrees with me and really just doesn't see the world as I do. And I don't think shouting is going to get it further, you know? So what that's made me have to do is, okay, work with that anger, but also I want to get the job done. So then I must just find another way. And so sometimes it's been constructive for me to say, take that force of anger, but what do you do? And then what's been very surprising in this movement, and I agree with Albie that there has been a big shift. And a lot of, Geordie just said it earlier, a lot of my white friends are saying, white people must just catch a wake up. And I'm just like, wow, guys, white people have been going, like, if you've been living like this, I'm not sure if I were privileged that I would easily catch a wake up. The thing about changing your way of being requires a very, very, a conducive space. And if I'm staring with my full throw out at a white man telling him, you've got to see your privilege, you've got to this, you've got to that, I don't ever think that's going to get done. So I've kind of, from my own personal looking for solutions, I've stepped back a little bit and I've said, okay, what would I need if I needed to change like that? And then I've gotten really curious about what, if assuming a white person wanted to be more inclusive, what would they actually do? And I can see how you can get stuck in the guilt of feeling bad, not knowing what you feel bad about, not being able to move forward. So For me, one step has been to find myself in a place where I can lift myself out of my own mire of emotions and be a bystander and a curious curiously question what is it that another person needs and help them through that, with no imperative to say you've got to go forward or you've got to go back. Let's just have a conversation and see where it goes. And then maybe you leave with some ideas and I leave with some insight about what makes white people tick. So yeah, that's my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Christelle. So can we come back to Simukai and Albie about Ron's comments as well as Christelle's?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think I'll respond to Christelle's because I think Albie's well placed to perhaps speak to Ron's. And I think that there was a lot of different themes and issues there. But something that sort of struck me is, as we're talking about both the importance of anger and then this sort of challenge or dilemma about what one does with that anger at a certain point, particularly when that anger involves forms of social confrontation with individuals and institutions that might be quite resistant to that change. I think anger can go, as well as other emotions, can go a long way to expanding our kind of collective purview about forms of injustice. But we also know, and we have ample evidence of this, and ample evidence on this Zoom call, that social change is not always achieved through reconciliation and through mutual understanding and empathy. And I think that an important facet of anger is the role that it plays in equipping us to be able to fight against systems that won't change. And I think that that's something that we sort of occasionally overlook, because giving up positions of privilege, reforming really entrenched histories and so on is not readily and not easily achieved, I don't think. And I think that there's also got to be an acknowledgement of the complexity of the fact that, the ends, to quote Isaiah Berlin, the ends of men are many and are not necessarily compatible with one another. And so the possibility of tragedy, whether individual or social, cannot always be avoided. And to some extent, I think it's also sobering to think through some of the wider implications of anger before we let it go, that we realize that it can be quite a motivating and powerful force to harness, even when it doesn't lead to reconciliation and where it might mean an ongoing fight for forms of justice. So that was just another thought that I wanted to put out there, because I'm certainly not in a position where, sort of personally or within my own political philosophy, I would readily kind of relent or acquiesce to institutions that, some of which I've seen operate so cynically and are unwilling to budge even when a social tide is shifting.
Okay, Albie.
Yes, well, the question was posed, would the magnanimity have been possible without massive transformation? And the answer is no. And it wouldn't have happened at the psychological level, and it wouldn't have happened at the institutional level. The precondition for our Truth Commission was votes for everybody, access to political power, destruction of all the apartheid apparatus, and a total change in who were calling the shots in the country. There has been massive economic change. There's a very, very big black middle class now in South Africa. It's not as though nothing has changed. We have social grants for the poor people that were never there before. So starvation has been converted to hunger, but still massive, massive inequality. If the people have continued to vote for the ANC, it's not because people are stupid, or they're terrified, or we've got charismatic leaders who people are following blindly. They've seen their lives improve in all sorts of ways. And yet there's great discontent, a lot of anger now. And the angriest people probably have been the students at the universities who we used to say the doors of learning and culture shall open in the Freedom Charter. The doors of learning and culture open, kids, boys and girls and boys, often from very poor townships, rural areas, come to university. They think we're getting there, and suddenly inequality hits them in the face. Mm-hmm. Formerly, they have access to learning. They're hungry. They have to choose between food and books. They have to travel miles to find a place to sleep. They see the other better off students speaking about their holidays and overseas and doing this, that, and the other. And they can't even think in those terms. So the inequality hits them now that they are breaking through in ways that jolt them into action and allying themselves with workers at the universities and so on, creating what is a very, very powerful, very disruptive movement. And the anger came from access to opportunity that's now being seen as skewed access to opportunity. But by and large, South Africa has changed enormously. And what is very positive is we have the mechanisms through our constitution to bring about further change. Whether it's through the electoral system, whether it's through civil society acting, in all sorts of ways, we can bring about further change. And so it means you don't have to do away with anger, either suppressing it, you don't have to dissolve it into a kind of bland magnanimity. You can channelize that anger into a proactive way of bringing about further enlightenment, further opportunity, further openness, further sealing of dignity in yourself. But to me, magnanimity is not something that you invite people to enjoy and saying, it will be so good for you. It will be worth all the vitamin tablets that you take, all the Pilates that you do, all the running that you do, all the weightlifting, whatever it might be, bicycles and so on, is to say, it's fun. It's a form of being yourself, enjoying yourself. To Crystal, I would say, now I'm going to offer you a little bit of advice. Choose your battles. Don't be scared to educate people. Grant them the dignity of at least being open to understanding. Let them know how you feel. Let them feel some of the subjectivity. The women's movement in that sense has achieved huge amounts through organizing, through being very angry, through throwing people into jail, but also not putting up with things that are unacceptable. And also I like to believe and hope and feel by saying, don't do this, don't touch me, don't think it's okay, in all sorts of ways. Where anger becomes destructive is when it becomes so internalized that it's now eating at your own gut and it's immobilizing you. Then there's something wrong. If the anger is fueling you to be more creative, to be more energetic, to seek out greater friendships, to team up with others, then I think it's very, very positive. And that's how we got a revolution in South Africa. It wasn't just through love, it was through revolution, huge revolution, millions of people being involved in a collective anger against this terrible, terrible, terrible system. But we had joy, we had fun. We were never so oppressed inside ourselves that we became gloomy. There was always laughter in our struggle. There was always solidarity. There was always singing. There was always movement. There was always that sense of being part of something beautiful, something larger than ourselves, but something in which we can make our own particular contribution.
Thanks, Albie. That was incredibly, I couldn't have wrapped up any better. We will ask Simukai if he has any last minute comments, and then we'll close. We're conscious of people's time, and we want to be respectful of closing out at 12:30, or my time. So we'll hear from Simu for a couple of minutes, and then we'll hear from Jerry and Barry to close us out and be out of here by the half hour. Thank you. Simu.
So I have no more sort of substantive things to say, but I just wanted to, again, express my gratitude for the opportunity and the platform to engage in this conversation, and for the privilege of meeting Albie and sharing in this kind of collective communal exercise of thinking through some really tough and challenging and interesting questions around anger and how it lives with us, what we do with it, and thinking more broadly about the joy and the healing that might be achieved in different forms of atonement. And it's certainly given me a huge amount to think about and to think with, and I'm incredibly appreciative of that.
Okay, Jerry.
Well, I'm humbled by this. This has been an incredible experience. And I want to thank Albie, who I've known for some years now. Albie, you really live up to everything we know about you. And thank you very much for treating us to that. Simukai, you're up there now on my list of heroes. I need to emulate you. And I've really been taken by both of you. And frankly, the comments and the feedback that we've received. This was not very polished. You will all accept that. This is not the most polished presentation, and this was not structured. It wasn't rehearsed. This was an authentic conversation, and this is exactly what Tom and Barry and myself and Tamsin had hoped would happen, that we could have an unpolished but authentic conversation about troubling issues. And it's really interesting. I was sitting on my hands most of the time because I wanted to talk, and I knew I'd get a chance at the end, so I had to shut up for a bit. But one of the things that strikes me is how much we hold up the South African example of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we even heard the word unique. And just next door to South Africa, during the Civil War, something really incredible happened in Mozambique. Women forgave their children for atrocities they had committed in their villages. And they invented ways of celebrating them and forgiving them and bringing them back into their own society. And we don't talk enough about other examples of where forgiveness comes from the heart and people resolve issues by finding ways to forgive one another. And I think this is fascinating that you know, we throw up the one or two examples, but some of the other examples sometimes get lost in the proximity, or because things don't end up in as polished a way, or because the heroes are not of the same stature. But I really would urge us all to look for other examples where ordinary people have found ways of making peace and moving on and taking their anger and using it constructively. Now, the reason I've been asked to wrap up is not to give you a diatribe, so I'll shut up, but it's to say, if you think this is worthwhile, nobody wants to own this, by the way. This is something that should be owned by all of us. But we need to know whether this is of interest, whether it needs follow-up, whether there are other issues you want to discuss, whether you found it useful. And we don't want to stop at just talking. We need to build a world community that deals with some of these challenges we're facing. And COVID has made it so clear to us that things are really, the wicked problems are augmenting by the hour rather than by the month. And we need to find a community of other activists just as angry and as worried as ourselves to be able to move on. So please let us know if this was useful. I know this will be recorded. We will share it with everybody who participated or who registered. And as a final thought, let me say that I'm speaking to you from Brussels, where there is an Africa museum that has just been reinvented. And one of the things that is striking about this museum is that they have had to live with the fact that the racism is institutionalized in the walls. It's in the actual cement of the building. And so the only way they could do this was by being really creative. And one thing they did, for example, was where there is a list of all the Belgian soldiers that were killed during colonial times in the Congo. They built a wall of all the African children that had died in Belgium in the same period. So when the sun comes up, the the shadow of the names of the African children falls on the names of the soldiers that died in the Congo. And it's the kind of juxtaposition that I thought Albie was talking about. So I'm just throwing it out there as another example of how do you deal with emblematic racism that you have in your hands and you have to be responsive to. We want to close this out with a piece of music that you may have heard at the beginning that Barry wrote. And it's so appropriate that we spent most of this last hour and a half talking about anger. This was an angry piece. It's also a beautiful piece. And we thought I would now like to just ask Barry to introduce us to this, and then he'll play us out. And you will let us know if you think this is worth maintaining or keeping going. Barry?
Thank you. This was a reaction after I had watched one man put his knee on another man's neck, and I went downstairs. Tamsin said I composed it. I didn't compose it. It burst out of me, and it's called Cold-Blooded Murder in America, and it just was 2 minutes, 18 seconds of my search for redemption out of that horror. And it takes us beyond the edge of words, because I found no words I could really express.
Be safe.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Okay, bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Albie. Thank you, Simukai.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you for that beautiful conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Hope.
to say hi, Rita.
Thank you.
Okay, over.
Thank you, Albie and Simu. This was incredibly wonderful and a thrill to see you both. I feel honored to claim you as friends. Very honored.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
I don't know. It looked good to me. What do you guys think?
I feel very, very sorry that I missed to switch on the recording at the start. But maybe just to say we've got Barry's piece from the end, and I can get Finn to do the holding initial page, and we can just put that over.
Yeah, don't worry about that. I mean,
These things happen. Don't worry about it.
yeah.
The best kind of evaluation I find of meetings is how long people linger at the end. If they leave straight away, you've had a bad meeting. If they hang on, I mean, we finished the thing and people were still sitting there. You know, we must have done something right.
Well, first of all, thank you, Tamsin, for pushing us to get on with it.
Yeah.
And both you, Barry,